to that person, this is the most like intimate and healing conversation they've had in a long time, and they don't want it to end. And like, to me, this is a sign that the peer specialist is doing a great job, right? Because they're disclosing in a way that's deeply healing, probably for both parties. And at the same time, we have other duties that we've got to get to. So we don't want to abandon and drop people or tell them that we don't want to talk to them. And at the same time, we have got to get some other things done. So how do we handle this?
Connecting them to other self-help support groups.
If they can get the support from support groups, then we don't have to be their only support. That is definitely the way in. So we want to carry the message and be that role model that makes it seem really attractive to go to a self-help support group. So how would we have that conversation? What could we say?
Maybe something like, I'm really enjoying talking about this stuff with you. Can we continue this conversation at a later moment? I have to attend to such and such.
Yeah, you could do it that way. So you start out saying that you're enjoying it. That's not a bad thought. Other ideas?
Libby, I think it would be a good idea to introduce the person to someone who attends the meeting. And this way, it brings helper therapy principle into play also.
And I want to give you an example of how this happened by accident when I was working at Share. This is at Grosvenor before we moved. A woman came to talk to me in the office, and she said, I'm thinking about going to the Sexual Compulsives Anonymous group, but I don't know if it's okay for women to go to that group. And she's asking me if I thought it would be okay. And right at that moment, the secretary of Sexual Compulsives Anonymous walks up to hand me their meeting payment, right? And I was like, it's really great that you're asking me this. And I turned to him and I said, hey, I said his name, do you think that she could attend your group? How does Sexual Compulsives Anonymous think about this gender issue? Because Sexual Compulsives Anonymous does have mostly men, and is oriented kind of thoughtfully towards serving the gay community. And he was like, oh yeah, you can totally come. There's a lot of women who come to this group. And right away, I could see this sort of relief in her, like, okay, I thought I was going to be shamed for asking this question, and instead I'm being welcomed. And she went into that group and never looked back. She started going all the time. Like it was an immediate connection. Like he didn't even tell her anything about his history or disclose anything. It's just the fact that she knows he's someone who has sexually compulsive behavior. She didn't have to tell her story. She knows she's welcome, and she went into the meeting. So like, for so many people, it's like that moment of, okay, I finally belong somewhere. Finally talk about this with somebody. So I love the idea, this is the Stanford model where if I give someone a flyer for Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, they're very unlikely to go. If I introduce them to someone from that meeting, they're very likely to go. So it's that personal connection makes a huge difference to people. The other thing I would suggest with this type of thing, which happens a lot with folks that are just isolated and they haven't been welcomed back into the human family, which is kind of a lot of what Share does. We try to welcome people back into the human family. I try to let people know what my limitation is. As someone starts talking to me, I say, I really want to talk to you about this, but I just need you to know that I have to do the volunteer orientation at 3 o'clock. So I only have about 10 minutes to talk to you. But I really want you to get as much support as you need. And we should take a look at the meeting board and see which kind of meetings you might be able to really have this conversation about. Or similarly, as a peer bridger, I might say something like, I've got all of these things that I've got to do, but I want you to get all the support that you need, whether I'm working or not. So let's talk about how to connect you to support groups in your area so that you can have like the same conversation you have with me, you can have with other folks in these meetings. Yeah, I think this is kind of an important one. All right. So number 4, who'd like to read this one?
I'll do it.
Okay.
After the Narcotics Anonymous meeting, the peer specialist strikes up a conversation with someone who just attended their first meeting. The peer specialist lets them know that the peer specialist is a recovering heroin addict who lost everything and lived on the street for several years. The newcomer is so freaked out that they run out of the building.
Okay, so you can see how there's a difference between number 3 and number 4. In number 3, it's an incredibly like powerful connection and deeply important to the person. And in number 4, it's scary and too much for them. There's like the two sides of that boundary. What do you think the peer specialist might feel as this happens? What might be going through their mind?
Definitely guilty.
They might feel guilty.
Yeah.
They might be confused because they weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
What about the newcomer? What do you think the newcomer is feeling?
They're afraid.
They're
Yeah.
freaked out. They're
Yeah.
scared. They might, in fact, be in that situation. They might be someone who's using heroin and living on the streets, and maybe the reason they're freaked out is it's too similar to their life, perhaps. I mean, it's hard to know exactly.
Yeah.
I actually met someone who was at the retreat and who told me that he got a little bit freaked out at the retreat because some of our staff disclosed their stories very openly, and it was a little too much for him. Like he was like, wow, why are these people telling me all this stuff? I can't handle this. So it's kind of recognizing that our stories are powerful and we want to use them for good. and we need to be able to take the temperature. In other words, we need to be able to say, okay, here's someone who might be able to use some support. I want to carry the message with this person, but I can disclose at different levels. You know, I can tell only one piece of my story. I don't have to say the whole thing, you know, depending on what that person might need at this moment. Like it would be good to notice, for example, that this is their very first meeting. And so they're just kind of exploring this whole recovery concept. Yeah. What do y'all think about that? Do you think that that could happen? That someone's
Yeah, I think you got to know your audience.
Yeah.
I think too, like, I mean, people they have history, they have family members, you know, they could have a parent who overdosed on heroin. They could have a brother that they, you know, watched, you know, repeatedly not out. I mean, there's generally when there's that kind of a response to it, there's trauma associated with it.
Yeah.
And so just, I think one of the, you know, why us being trauma informed in these roles that we provide is super important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so does anyone want to give an example of a conversation you might have? Someone's just been to their very first NA meeting and they're leaving the meeting. What kind of conversation might you have? Does anyone want to give it a try?
Like a conversation that we have.
Like what might you say to the person as they're leaving the meeting? That would be thoughtful about the fact that they're very new. This is their very first meeting.
Yeah, I always just try, like I introduce myself and I tell them like, I'm so happy that you're here. And like, what's going on? Like, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? It'd be cool to kind of get to know each other a little bit. Next time I see you in the meeting, I want to be able to like say hello, you know? And then just a lot of times they'll be like, you know, it's funny about this one though, because I've had that situation where I've disclosed being a heroin addict that live on the street, and they're like, these NA meetings are crazy, man. Like I just came in here for weed, and like, you know, they're just kind of like, whoa, like I'm not this kind of an addict, you know?
Yeah.
And then being able to share that third tradition with them of like, the only requirement is a desire. That's it. Like, and some of us had that desire way before we were even able to stop, you know? And then like, I try to connect with the things that we do have in common, the similarities, focusing on the similarities, but letting them we always talk about like unsolicited advice being, to be very cautious of that, especially in the beginning with the newcomer. And just kind of asking them questions and helping them feel important and showing interest in their discoveries and their experiences, and not correcting it, just embracing it and inviting more of it and celebrating them, the AAA, right? Like, I'm so happy you're here. Like, it's so awesome. Welcome home. Like,
I love that.
yeah.
Great. I mean, the part of our stories that they might relate to the most is if I disclose my experience at my first meeting. I mean, I remember going to my first meeting and being really scared and confused and not knowing what all this 12-step stuff is, like being really like bewildered by it and scared of the spiritual part. And so I might say, I just really respect your courage in going to a meeting. I remember at my first meeting, I was really confused about it and I didn't really know what to think. And I was wondering how you felt in your first meeting, just something that is a little bit maybe more surface than like my whole story. I remember meeting someone whose drug of choice was cough syrup, and which is very addictive. And she didn't feel comfortable sharing at NA meetings because she thought the other addicts would laugh at her for having a cough syrup addiction. And then finally, she met someone at NA who also had a cough syrup addiction, and they became like so connected because they both had like a really serious problem with it and didn't really, they felt they could share that with each other in a way that other people couldn't understand it in the same way. So I know that people's drug of choice can really make a difference about that sense of connection. I think it takes some recovery to get to the third, that like the part that Sarah's talking about. Sarah's saying the only requirement is, right? But I think it actually takes some recovery to be able to see that. Like it took some recovery for me to be able to see that it doesn't really matter what my trauma history is or what horrible things happened. I have a lot in common with other people, even if they didn't have those experiences. I began to see my similarities over time, but at first, it was confusing, and I didn't get that. It was kind of hard. Okay, gosh, I wonder if we're taking too long here. So, the fifth one. Anyone want to read that one?
When someone confides that they think their meds might need to be adjusted, the peer specialist disclosed that they had to adjust their meds many times. The person asked the peer specialist what to do.
Okay, so how do we handle this one? We don't want to give medical advice.
I remember what you said. You would ask them, well, last time you thought you needed it adjusted, what did you do? So
Yeah.
They can kind of remember and they can come up with the answer themselves.
Good idea. How else might you handle it? Anybody else have a thought, what you might say?
I can maybe put something in here. The disclosing immediately about, changing meds right away probably isn't the way the conversation should be started, right? It should be started in another way, which just to ask them, if they have, if they've changed before, if they have a doctor. I mean, just asking questions rather than, giving our experience to begin with without really knowing what it is that they're even asking.
It's interesting to me. I mean, that might be a way to go about it, is just to try to listen and find out more. That's never a bad strategy. Listening is never a bad strategy. I do think that sometimes people are wondering if we're going to judge them for having a psychiatric condition and for taking medication for it. Sometimes there's judgment in the recovery community around that. Like people don't necessarily want to tell anyone because they're like, okay, you're going to think I'm not sober, or you're going to think that I'm insane or something. And when you have a mental health diagnosis, I would be thoughtful about that. I would say, I've taken psychiatric medications before and it hasn't always been easy. And my purpose in doing that is to help them see I'm not judging that, but rather have had a similar experience to where I don't have that higher position of authority over them. Like we're we're in this together type of thing.
I
But-
always want to
but-
refer them back to the professional.
Yeah, my disclosure at the same time could lead the person to ask me. And it's amazing how many, like, there's been 3 or 4 times that I've been asked, should I get my medication adjusted? And I think to myself, do I look like a psychiatrist?
A little bit. You might a little bit.
What am I doing wrong here? I don't want to come across as a psychiatrist. So I think it's important to minimize our authority at this point, to be able to say, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist or a medical professional or anything. And so I would never like think that I could advise you on your medications, but I do know that it's really hard when they're not right, and that it's really important to get some help around that. You know, do you want me to support you in contacting? Like, do you have a therapist or a psychiatrist that you think you could work with on this? You know, I would try to find out maybe if there are resources in their life. Maybe if there's other people around, like some people are looking for a psychiatrist, and there might be other people around who have one. Like this might be a time when I could say, I know a lot of people that go to certain self-help support groups have psychiatrists. And if you attend that group, you might be able to ask them like who they see and ask them if they like their doctor, and figure out if that doctor could work for you, as a way of connecting them to a larger community of people who also have, you know, need to get psychiatric services. You know, I mean, if someone asks you if their meds might need to be adjusted, in a way they're asking you, do you think I'm crazy? Am I getting manic? Do I seem weird or something like that? Like there's a little bit of a hint that maybe they think that they're coming across that way. So I might,
Me. Mhm.
you know, just be aware of that. Like I might say, well, you know, when you ask me that, are you wondering if you seem weird or if you seem like different than you were before? You know, sometimes people might want to have a mirror held up. Like I had a friend who was bipolar, and she would always ask me, do you think I'm kind of manicky right now? Because she wasn't always sure when that shift was happening. So yeah. All right. So number 6. Anyone want to read that?
I'll do it.
Okay.
When the peer specialist discloses that they were also homeless at one time, the person asks if they can come stay with them for a while.
Okay, so the person doesn't have housing and they asked if they could come over to your house and stay with you. How might you respond to that?
For me, I would disclose that I just got custody back of my daughter, and she just moved back in with me. So right now I'm taking time to build the relationship between me and her.
I'm so happy for you, Jennifer. That is so amazing and fabulous. That is great. I really applaud you and your recovery. I know that takes a lot of work and courage. So that's so great to hear. And that would be good. I think that makes it like, I don't feel rejected by that at all, what Jennifer said. I'm like, oh yeah, she's got to get this thing with her daughter sorted out. How else might you approach that? Anybody else have an idea?
Like if I like you so much, and I think that you're amazing, and I love being able to have this interaction with you. Like the only thing is that if I made the decision to do that, like I wouldn't have a job anymore to be able to pay my rent, and we'd both end up homeless, you know, like, or maybe not say we'd both end up homeless, but like just letting him know, like, oh, that's so again, like if I had my way, you know, I'd have my house filled up with people or whatever. But you know, it's like what is it?
The boundaries over there.
Boundaries over there, yeah. Of like, or like, you know, partners in crime, like, you know, that like
Wish you could do that, but
they're the bad guy for not letting me do it. But like I would, but like they won't let me, you know,
yeah,
the rules, I just have to follow them, like kind of a thing.
I've got to stay in the bounds of my job, and
Yeah.
you know, it's one of the limitations of my role. I think people really prefer that we be honest about the limitations of our job, than that we promise them everything and then don't deliver. They would much rather have us say, you know, I just can't do that. I think it would be viewed as a real boundary violation. I want to support you into getting into housing, and these are some of the options. But I might also say, you know, I just don't have room for additional people, and my place is really small. It's just not going to work. At the same time, you know, the fastest way to get housing is to move in with a friend. And if people have more friends, if they go to self-help support groups and make more friends, then they get housing. They, you know, someone has an extra room and they move into it. This is like, a lot of people are able to do this if they have some relationship skills. The reason we end up working with a lot of people is that they don't have the relationship skills to be able to do that. They can't navigate those conversations like, how much is the rent going to be? Am I going to be able to use the kitchen? Which bathroom can I use? You know, that's just unmanageable. So they need other options. Okay, this is good. So having had this whole conversation about the challenges of disclosing, what conclusions do you draw about some of the things we need to be thinking about around disclosures and the kind of disclosures that we're doing at work? What are your thoughts about it?
It's important to remember that we're still professionals. Like, we're peers, but we're also professionals in the workplace.
This is a job, and so disclosing for us is an intervention that's intended to support the other person. So we want to try to think about both their needs and our own in that interaction.